Oh, great. So June, thanks for joining the Diary of an African Entrepreneur podcast. Good to have you on this episode. To get things started, can you tell us a bit about yourself and Senga Technologies? Which is one of the reasons why we're interviewing you today.
Okay, I think let me give you the short form, and then if you want the long form, you'll tell me, just so we can manage the time. I'm Nairobi born. I was born. I live in Nairobi now. I was born here. I went to the U.S. for college. And lived in the U.S. for 20 years, and then came back here. That's the really short story. A slightly longer story is that I went to the U.S. through what you call harambes in Kenya. Like, we used to have this thing where your family and your extended family and your family friends sort of pooled money to get you to school. That was my path to the U.S. And I ended up in New York, in upstate New York. I was supposed to go to some school there. I didn't. I actually never attended that school. It was SUNY New Paltz. And then I went to New Jersey, and then I went to Massachusetts, and I put myself through college, actually. So in spite of finishing high school when I was 16, I didn't have my first degree until I was 27, just because I was in and out of school trying to get money to go through school. And my dad passed away somewhere in that time. I studied computer science as an undergrad. I have an MBA from Harvard Business School. In terms of my career, while I was trying to figure out how to get money for tuition, and also while I was a uni student, I did all kinds of jobs, call centers, taking care of sick people, staying in their homes over the weekends, overnights, etc., like typical immigrant stuff. And then after undergrad, I actually wanted to do a PhD. I didn't do a PhD because I didn't have money. So I got hired into a company called EMC, which was at the time, it was a top information data storage company, information technology company sort of for data, back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. Spent 7 years there, went to graduate school, went to San Francisco for a short time. Under 1 year, I worked for a company called Meraki, which is a cloud networking company. I should also mention, when I was an undergrad, one of my customer service jobs was in supply chain for Compaq, which was then hired by Hewlett-Packard. After San Francisco, I came here. I had wanted to start a business for so long, many years. And that was just the time. And then the way the location happened was somewhat accidental and somewhat not. And I've now been here since 2016 or end of 2015, building what is Senga.
Before I go on to asking a few questions about Senga, there are certain things about your background that is quite interesting. You talked about the fact that at the age of 16, you went, the family friends, they pulled money together to send you for your university education. But I can imagine that many of your other colleagues that finished from my school were going to school in Kenya. What was the motivation? What was the drive behind that move? Why they all had to pull these sources together to send you to the US?
Yeah. So just for clarity, so I finished high school at 16. I went to the US at 18. The motivation. So my dad just felt that it was important for me to study somewhere else, to be exposed. It was as simple as that. And then the question was whether it was going to be the UK or the US. And the UK was just more difficult in terms of, if you had to help yourself, it was a more difficult environment to help yourself in, I think, or at least in anyway, the tuition was just higher, I think. And for the US, it's sort of, I think people know the American story in general. And then in terms of like the coming together, we're just a middle-class family. It doesn't, a middle-class family is not going to afford what was, I'm trying to remember at that time, was it like $7,000 per semester in tuition? So that was just a typical thing that happened for families, middle-class families that were sending their kids to the US. to figure out like the tuition. And then the idea was to at least get there and then figure it out as it went along.
Yeah. And those 2 years before you left, what were you doing? You said 16 to 18.
Good question. Yeah, I two things. My dad forced me to study German at the Goethe Institute. I first didn't LU. I ended up playing around with that and not being very good. I used my for someone else just not good. I think I did like 2 out of 3 of the tiers or whatever, and I also misused my dad's money. Like, may he forgive me wherever he is. So that's what I was doing during the day. And then in the evening, I went to Strathmore College and I was doing a course called IDPM, which is also a kind of like computing course. So in high school, I was pretty good at, let's say, sciences. Yeah. And my dad was also an engineer. So, so I guess it matched with my strengths, even though I wasn't necessarily attracted to it. Like back then, things were just very rote. You're going to do a course like that, which was not kind of novel, if you will, or you're going to do accounting or whatever. I would never be an accountant. So, so I was doing a computing course for literally from out of high school for a year and a half until I went to the US. That's what I was doing.
Okay. And then after those 2 years, you went to the US, went to college. You also talked about the fact that you did a lot of jobs, during that period, like call centers and the others. What that experience built in you, if you look back now from the benefit of hindsight, all those experiences you had during this period you were working, do you think they shaped you to be who you are today?
You never asked me that question. Yeah, because I was like a home health aide, a call center worker. I worked all the time. Like if I was not in school, I was working. When I was not in school, I was entirely working. So for me, in terms of shaping me, like, I don't know, my life, I think, has just been work, actually, a lot of work. So I don't think about, like something like work-life balance. Like that's just not something in my vocabulary because I've always just had to work what needed to be done to get things done or to survive. And I just get I think I've always, like, quite literally, right? Like if you're a home health aide, you get your hands dirty. Right. So like there's no job that's too small for me. Like it just doesn't exist. It just does not exist. So I think maybe in that way, I would say that's probably the biggest thing. Like there's just no barriers for me and what needs to be done.
Yeah.
In terms of,
I can imagine. And then the whole work thing, school work. So somehow you transition into when you even finish school, you are used to that continuous work ethics, and that just carried on as well.
I used to even sleep. I remember when I was in school, like managing school and work, because when I was in school, finally full-time, I was also working full-time. Like I would literally sleep in the lab or wherever there was a couch. Just moving between like school, getting homework done, sleeping wherever I needed to sleep, and then going wherever I needed to be. Yeah.
Would you advise young people to do that today? To have such experience?
Yeah, like my experience. Yeah. I mean, but the thing is, like, your background also impacts you, right? Because if you don't have the need to do it, I don't know how you end up doing it. But at the same time, what I'm realizing, even in my day-to-day like experience with Senga, I think just now I'm understanding very clearly, especially this year, that some level of adversity is very, very, very important. It's just important. Yeah.
I completely agree with you that, and I think it's a lot of things that is one of the things that is missing, especially when you are privileged. You don't have those adversity that gets to shape you sometimes. So sometimes I had actually needed. Yeah. Okay, good, great. Let's fast forward in that story. So you move along that journey. You finish school. You work with EMC. I think you mentioned that. And so where you were at EMC, what were you doing there? And was there any connection between what you did at EMC and Senga today? Can you draw a line between those experiences?
Yeah. So I certainly can draw a line looking back. So EMC was my first, let's say, post-college job. And I was a software engineer. and I was doing something called embedded software engineering. So EMC was building data storage systems. So storage systems are used to, like, they run in banks, hospitals, basically anywhere where data needs to be stored. And EMC was one of the pioneers in that field, and actually the leader in that field. And the software was writing, so it's not like the kind of like UI stuff that you've been dealing with every day, right? We were writing software that was interacting with the hardware to push data through, like literally like the ones and zeros of data, if you will. But not at the hardware level, just above the hardware level. When I was an undergrad, it may sound crazy, but both at Strathmore or as an undergrad, this is not even like a field I imagined. Like, of course, all computing is around information, but it's not even a field I sort of was conscious of, nor one I expected to be in. Like, I did well in my sort of operating systems classes and hardware, class, but it's not a place I imagine myself to be in. And I think one thing I should mention is, like, when I went to do a computer science program, for me it was actually it was just out of being practical. Like, there's so many things I liked. Like, when I was in high school, I was all over the place. Like, for science congress, I think one year I did like some biochemistry project. Another one I did like a lighting project. Like, there's no one particular field that I was highly attracted to. I was attracted to very many things, environmental science, etc. And even for undergrad, I remember the way even when I was picking my initial degrees, like, it was just looking through a catalog and, what sounds interesting. Like, I hate finance, but like I could have gone into banking. So what happened was, I happened to be, a student, a college student at the end of the 90s, and computing was like booming, right? And I had that skill, and I was good at it, and I also liked sort of like difficult. I tend to be attracted for. I think this is not for better, but for worse, to like very difficult thing. Like, I literally switched school because, like, of course, was like not challenging enough. So yeah, it was ridiculous. It's very ridiculous. So I like sort of like the difficulty of it, and like the sense of accomplishment you feel when you've like done something you just don't know you could do, or you're very, very surprised. So even like when EMC offered to hire me, initially they offered me an internship because I was going to go to graduate school, and then, I was still thinking about this sort of like PhD thing, and they offered me an internship in something called advanced development. Very shocking. And then they end up offering me a full-time role. And I remember just being stunned that anyone would want to hire me. I was just like, what do they mean they want to hire me? and then I did the pure software code writing in the first 3 years. Learned a lot. It's a kind of company, you're doing hardcore engineering work, right? So what that means is you're working with some very, very, very smart people, like just brilliant people, and I had like very good manager, Patsilio, very good, like very, very good peers, good mentors. So I just learned a lot in a very, very short time. And then I became a technical lead. So when I became a lead, I was doing some coding, but also coordinating work that other engineers were doing. And then after that, actually, I just saw the boss who made that possible for me 2 weeks ago, after not seeing him for 10 years, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very nice. So after that, I became a product manager. So I wanted also to sort of move to the business side, because I'm basically a combination of my mom and my dad. So my dad was like an engineer. My mom used to be a teacher, and then she became a business person. And I also just had this like inkling for business and organizations. I just loved that. And in my job at EMC, I noticed like I was always trying to just like own the thing, or like I was just constantly like owning the thing. So I was like, okay, I wanted, so I moved to sort of the product management side, which, my engineering friends call like moving to the dark side. And yeah, and in terms of and that was over a span of 7 years. And I remember also just being like constantly restless, if you will, in my roles. Yeah, and I mean, of course, now in Senga, so I happen to be one of those people who very, very luckily, the things I have learned in school, I experience them in my work. Like, there's nothing I can say, I studied this and it was useless. And when people say that I cannot relate, I don't understand it. Like, my mathematics, I use. Computer science, I use. Right? Both the math and the literal computing. My business school studies, I use. Right? And then directly with EMC, I was a product manager there. Right? So I knew how to write code, work with people who are writing code, think about what products you're giving to a customer and why, and have to justify it and have to prioritize. Those are literally every day I'm living that life. And my post EMC career at Meraki was also just an elevation of whatever I'd done at EMC.
Well, very interesting. I can see that very clear line. The way you explained it now, given the kind of work you do, the things you did at EMC, but even the build up all the way to EMC, the courses you took, and you being able to get to that point with EMC. So very, very interesting. Now, you left EMC at some point. You went to business school. You went to Harvard Business School, a prestigious business school as well. And I've met many people that have been, that went to Harvard or other prestigious business school. There are so many things that are out there now about, should I go to business school? Is it the right thing to do? So if you hear that, would you say that experience also shaped and benefited? I mean, I think you already alluded to it. That's one of the things we learned in business school. You found it helpful. But was that the only thing? Was there other things about that experience that has been critical to the success of Senga today?
Of course. So, because I don't want to just talk about Harvard, I'm just going to mention that I went to a state school, UMass Lowell, and and the other previous schools for undergrad that I was going to go to were nothing, not what anyone would consider special, right? So I just studied in a normal school for undergrad. I just worked my ass off, but yeah. So for me also, those were instrumental. Those were instrumental, like I would say, in my upbringing, if you will. Like as an undergrad, I was what you call a non-traditional student, right? I was older than the typical student, and I also just was not spending time outside of classes in school because I had to figure other things out, life out. So for HBS itself, so the way Harvard happened for me, so number one, I felt undereducated because I didn't pursue what like
PhD.
the PhD or even a CS in computer science. So I still needed to correct that.
The difficult side of you, always looking for that difficult hard thing.
Yeah, and with the CS degree and masters in CS, like the thought about that was when I was an undergrad, I'd taken the maximum possible graduate courses I could as an undergrad, right? For CS, and then not going to a CS masters was actually just an assessment. Once I was in the job, that it wasn't necessary for what I was doing, and furthermore, the interesting things that I liked in computer science, I would have to go to a PhD level. I wasn't gonna a master's degree was not going to be sufficient. And then so for business school, it was now that exploration of sort of like the business side. A little story that I lived in Massachusetts. That's actually, yeah. And I would spend time, I mean, when we do outings, one of them, of course, would be like Harvard Square. And I remember even thinking about it as an undergrad, like how does someone get into this kind of school, and I felt very insecure and inferior. But I imagine what it was like to be a Harvard student. So it was just, this is something I just realized later, like that seed was in me for a long time. And then did the GMAT and so on. That was an entire other story. I ended up in therapy at some point for like not doing well with the GMAT, and then I like redo the GMAT. And then true story. And then I get into this school. And when I got into this school, for me, because I had not had a typical undergraduate experience, I wanted a true college experience. So for me, Harvard Business School was entirely all consuming for me. Like it was making up for my undergrad, like, for not being able to just be involved in school.
Yeah.
And then, so it was just that overall experience, having friends in college and just being a full-time student and doing nothing else. And then the other side was also just for me, there was a very, very strong desire to learn. And I wanted to learn from the best. And I did learn from some of the best for some of the best. And so for me, it was not just some kind of like checkbox, if you will, of like, I need to, no. Like I actually just wanted to be also very good in this thing called business. And the thing with the way Harvard teaches, right, what you're doing is you're basically scanning lots and lots and lots and lots of business scenarios. And for some of those things, I felt like I had an instinct already. And then for some of those things, they were entirely new, right? I remember feeling very, very, very at home when I was at the graduate school. I was just like literally, this is for me. Like I remember even when I got accepted to multiple schools. But I remember I didn't cry when I got into HBS. Like I did. What am I saying? I did. But it just felt like it was meant to be kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like one of the significant benefits for me for going, and people, I think the question people have asked me is if I would go again. Like I would, like, not only would I go to Harvard Business School numerous times, I hope in my next life or next several lives, I will actually have the privilege of going to Harvard College. Because it's something very special to be immersed in an environment where quite literally everyone around you is better than you. Or better than you at something. Like that's one of the things. You just simply learn that this is just better and you haven't reached and you may never even reach, right? And it's highly, highly stimulating and you're constantly around people who are stimulating and you're getting different ideas and some ideas shock you. Like people will say things that you don't like and you're just like, I didn't even know somebody could think like this, right? But it's beneficial in terms of understanding the different ways of existing that you wouldn't necessarily understand in any of the many bubbles that we find ourselves in. And then from a pure sort of like business perspective, I would say because of the very wide exposure to scenarios that we have, like you see a lot of mistakes happening, right? And a lot of good things happening. So I think it actually just cuts down the learning time in real life, because there's some mistakes I don't step into because I've seen the story. And I'm just like, I remember this business, did this, and this was the outcome. Right. And there's a lot of that. So for me, it's very, very helpful in that way. Do people need business degrees to start businesses? 100% no. Absolutely not. You know, I remember when I was at EMC and I was, like my mentors there, like people were very, very supportive of me. At the same time, some of them also did not understand why I was going to business school. Like why? Like they just felt I was going to be fine anyway. Yeah. But yeah, for me, it cuts down like that sort of like knowledge awareness and sometimes like pattern matching for me has been helpful in my day to day. Yeah. I'm not like, if you ask me, has it made my life easier? I'm not sure, but I certainly know there's certain mistakes that I haven't made because I saw it before.
You said something very profound, and probably I've not heard it from someone who has been very successful as you. I mean, you've been quite successful as in your own right. You said that in Harvard, you'll be surrounded by people who are better than you in one or many things. For me, what is profound about you saying that is the acceptance of it. which I see a lot of people struggle with. Is a lot of successful people struggle with that concept that there are people that are better than them in one or many things. Now, as an ambitious, driven, growth-oriented person, entrepreneur like you, how do you live with that truth that there are many people better than you, and you probably will never be the best?
Yeah.
Some of these things. How do you live and still go ahead with that reality?
I mean, there's no person who exists who there's no one better than. Isn't that just
Absolutely. It's the acceptance for me.
Yeah.
I've been around many people that refuse to accept that, and even the way they behave and act shows like I know it all. I'm this, that's, yeah. They were.
I don't know. I don't know. I always feel like, I don't know. Is it a lack of acceptance, either maybe a lack of knowledge, right? Like right now, like if I think about the things we're trying to do in our company, like there's some things I think about, I think this is novel. I think we're coming up with this. But then if we think through like just the history of time, like there's always a thing in the back of my mind, which is just almost no new idea.
Yes.
Right? So there's someone else who's thought about this, and there's probably two things that are happening. Either one, they're doing it and you simply don't know about them. Or two, they thought about it and for whatever reason they couldn't do it. But something like entirely sort of like fresh. Like I don't know. So for me, this is something I'm very aware with. And like now there's some problems. Like now I'm getting a little bit of space to sort of like think about the business. And I'm just like, wait, there are a lot of problems we encounter. And like I'm trying to be a hero, trying to solve them. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this can't be the first time someone has experienced this problem. Like, who has experienced this problem before? Right? And how did they solve it? Right? So like right now, what I want to do, and I'm trying to do, is actually just read about the people who've done things before, similar to ours, tangentially to ours, and so on and so forth. Right? Because they've solved a problem I don't need to solve. Yeah. So I don't know. That's just how I think about these things. There's nothing new. There's probably very little is new under the sun, let's say. And these are just truths.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, it's a good segue now, because I want to look at Senga itself.
Yeah.
And tell me about the company. What do you do? What is the business into? What are you building? Tell us a bit about
it. Yeah. So I'm also just going to give you the short form, and then we can expand as you wish. So Senga, we are a company in the logistics and supply chain space. And what we're trying to do specifically is streamline logistics and supply chain for retail. And when I talk retail, I'm talking about like formal retail, like the people who support formal retail, that is supermarkets, people who are supplying to the supermarkets, and ultimately or eventually the supermarkets themselves and anyone sort of like informal retail. It's not where we started, but it's where we are now. Like before, I was just looking at logistics more broadly. I'd almost started a logistics company in the US. I've studied sort of like Western logistics. And then we also did some things in the early years of Senga, but we ended up sort of like narrowing our scope to this particular segment. And then we offer two things. First, services. So we actually help with the actual movement of goods to these retail outlets. I came up with a way of doing that kind of logistics without central warehousing, which is traditional in what you call consolidated logistics, like what UPS does. But imagine UPS without warehousing.
Okay.
Or without sort of the central depots. And then the other thing is software, right? So we're also building software to assist with the workflows around the order fulfillment itself and things that are happening around the receiving of goods. So I think now, I would think of Senga right now as sort of like some kind of vertical or vertically integrated company in this particular space where we are tackling all the different layers of issues across fulfillment of orders, like very simply said.
So if I want to expand on that a bit, who are your customers? Who pays for your services?
Yeah. So our services are paid for by the manufacturers and other people who supply supermarkets.
So what you offer is the tech. Do you offer the infrastructure as well?
We offer services. Number one, we literally move the goods ourselves. That's one side.
Okay, so you offer the infrastructure is there.
Yes, yes. And then now is we're building software. So for me, one of the things, and so back to the EMC question and how it ties in. One of the things I noticed when I was working at EMC as an engineer in a company of thousands, right, was that I didn't have a touch point with the customer, and I never did for my entire time at EMC. And I was just like, we're building these things. These things are pretty sophisticated. We know the names of the customers who are consuming our stuff, but I haven't talked to them. Like, what I know is what I read about how they use it. And what I promised myself then was that if I ever built a company, I would make sure that anyone who was building a product for a customer quite literally has a direct line with the customer who's consuming it. So now if we think about like how we're building at Senga, and we started with services. We've been doing services for a very long time. Now is when we're getting into sort of like our software life cycle. And you know this because I'm in the middle of a software launch. It's very easy to look from the outside when you're assessing a problem and say, this is like the set of problems that are happening, right? Like, so for us, it was like, coordination problems, or even, I'll say something around like, okay, so timelines. Oh, timelines take too long. Why do they take too long? We'll try to do it faster and so on, right? So you look at the problem from the outside, very obvious. But there's a certain level of problems that you do not see until you're under the belly. And all those things are contributing to these things you've seen from the outside, right? So one of the ways to look at our services is not just thinking about how to make the customer experience better and deal with these sort of very obvious problems that are visible to the external world and even to the customers themselves, but to go underneath and see what there's no way you could see if you are not in it, right? So our services are also our R&D for our software. Like the kind of software we're building, there's absolutely no way we would have known to build it while we're not in the shoes of our customers. And there's no way to be in the shoes of your customers if you're not doing the work and then also not taking a peripheral view, if you will.
So does this follow the ideology that in Africa, I don't know about the rest of the world, to build a successful tech companies in areas like logistics, maybe even agriculture, you need to get your hands dirty for you to now layer the tech on it? Just building an independent tech solution does not give you the good experience enough to be able to build a solution that would work effectively. Would I be correct saying that?
I don't think it's entirely correct. And when I say I don't think it's entirely correct, I tend to, like nowadays when people talk about sort of, a lot of people say Africa this, Africa that, don't do this, don't do that. It's, it's not the time, whatever, industrial revolution, wrong. I think it's a question of like timing. So with certain things, we're suddenly behind. Let me compare to the US market because the US market is the one I understand very well. If I look at what we're doing in our company and I read about UPS and its days when it was starting, it's the same path. They didn't separate themselves from like the issue. You had to solve for very, very many things. So the thing with the US right now is for a lot of things people are building, someone has already done the work. But the work had to be done at some point.
Yes.
Right? So depending on what industry you're looking at, you either have to do a lot of the work or some of the work because someone else has done it, right? So I think with like fintech, it's just more polished, for example.
Correct.
So it's probably like easier, faster, and do less, and you can focus more or whatever.
Now, but you said something. You said that you transitioned at some point. What you started with is not what you're doing today. Like the story of almost every entrepreneur, you had to narrow down. At what point did you realize that had to happen and why?
So fast forward, Senga, we end up even looking at different ideas in logistics. It's very interesting when I see some of the ideas that we've come up with. People have since done them within the US or other places. Like some of them are that thing of like just too early. Sometimes you're too early, not just for your market, but you're just too early in general.
Yeah.
So we land on a utilization problem. in logistics, which I was pretty familiar with even globally. And so the version 0 of Senga, and I wanted, like, I was, like, we wanted to first provide logistic solutions for people in agriculture, because as you are very well aware, the farmer takes the most risk, and then people just take advantage of everything the farmer has gone through.
Yes. Sadly.
Yeah. And then I had also, like, followed, like, the cost of, I think I wrote a blog post about this years ago, like, where I just noticed, like, the price from the time the farmer is now selling it to what you get at the market is, like, just significant multiple. I was like, okay, we'll just provide, like, empty space, because I was just like, the coordination, there's a lot of trucks moving empty, whatever. We'll figure out how to get to the farmers. And then I realized in the pilot for that, like, oh my God, the farmers are far from the road. They're very many and they're very small. And you can't just come and sort of, like, put the truck there for them to fill. Yeah. And I remember, initially not having good thoughts about brokers, and realizing brokers play a very significant role in the agriculture, value chain. So we abandoned that for that time. And I'd say, okay. So the other thing I'd noticed was when I was trying to come up with a pilot, and I was trying to figure out, like, we say, for example, Kenya is, like, highly agrarian, but when I was trying to figure out, like, what is the right spot to run a pilot, nobody could give me that information. And this is what people in the agri space, people, people like Trademark East Africa, who, like, just no one would give it. So, and I couldn't figure out, is it that they don't want to share the information, or they don't have the information? Like, I could never, to date, I don't know what the answer is. And then I just realized, for us to get the information we need, we have to figure out how to act as if we were a full logistics company to get that information, right? So then I was like, how do you create a virtual company without owning the assets? Because I never wanted to own the assets. So we ended up building this, like, countrywide network and just learn on our own from scratch, like, all kinds of things. So then we decide we decide to offer logistics services to manufacturers, with the idea that once we start going out from, like, these hubs and go wide, then at some point we should figure out how to help still bring that produce back in.
Correct. That was smart. Yes.
Yeah. So that was the idea. So we start offering things to manufacturers. I wouldn't get into detail, but the way we think about our logistics, we're basically turning things upside down, like just breaking traditional models of how to do logistics, or designs of how to do logistics. So on the surface, it looks like, yeah, we're just offering vehicles and whatever and coordinating, but there's just far more complex things happening underneath. So we do that, and then sort of that starts to go well, and the company is growing, and the company was growing actually very steeply. So this is around, so unfortunately, when I moved to Kenya in 2016, my brother passes away, like, in under 4 months.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. And then that sort of, we don't realize it for a while, but we realize we've been caught up in, like, the emotion of something. So
Yes.
for quite a while, actually. So yeah, so the company is growing 2017, 2018, and we're profitable from the start. I remember when there was this competitor who launches trucks things, and I remember when they launched, they even used, like, the copy, like, literally my words on the website.
Wow.
Yeah. They were doing other things, like they were doing bikes, and then they move into trucks. Right. So they
literally copied your words from your website.
Escrow, we're gonna do escrow, blah blah blah. And
I mean, it validates what you're doing in some ways.
I wasn't thinking about it that way. For many years I spent too much time thinking about competition. So and they were good at raising money, good at PR, things I would actually say that I'm not good at. And then they raise money. And then and then they're undercutting price and so on. So at some point I'm like, people will realize, let's just hold on, and people will realize this is this is not sustainable. And then a year later they raise even more money, right? Because before I don't remember how many millions it was, and then it became like more than 10 million or whatever. And I remember this moment, and I was just like, we're screwed, because like people are, this is not rational. But what is happening right now is a race to the bottom, And when you race to the bottom, like none of you is safe. Like you will all be taken out, right? Actually, now this links to like the things I learned in like business. Yeah. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, we need to find a place to play in where you're not going to win. You're not going to try to win using capital. You have to win using expertise and your own sort of innovations and whatever it is you've come up with internally. So it needs to be a kind of black box, right? And when you're just moving goods with like full truckloads, or you can say, oh, I don't know, this is the cost of fuel, the cost of the truck or whatever, and try to do some simple math to try to replicate, right? And I was just like, we need to go into something like consolidation. So what had happened was initially when I was validating sort of the problems, had sort of like a wide scope of exposure. So there's lots of people I talked to, so I'd known about many problems in this space, even though we were not going to fix them, even though we had no intention to fix them, right? So over time, like some of those things would just repeat themselves. Like people would ask us, can you do this? Can you do this? And what we used to do, we would literally get information for people and give it to them, even negotiate on their behalf. We're like, you don't need to be our customer. We have networks we can use. We'll package this information for you, or we've negotiated for you. Call this person. They'll give you the service. And one of the things was around like moving small loads and moving small loads in general and moving small loads to supermarkets. So then, when this thing happens and like the market is going insane with all of this like VC cash, and I'm like, we're going to go down with it. I'm like, we need to go into something more complex. Moving small loads, it's complex, right? And if we had to move small loads without owning assets, like how would you think about it? And that ends up being basically the Senga version that we've doubled down on. And then leading also to sort of this software that we're doing. So we end up thinking, okay, like if we serve like the retail sector, if we think about the problems they encounter, like there are many of them, of course, there's a lot of retail because we all consume things. And then there's like a least common denominator problem that everyone is experiencing, right? So it may be different in place A and place B, but in general, there's some things that they're all experiencing. And can I just tell you, if we fast forward, last year, something amazing happened sort of like in the beginning of last year. And I ended up being in a position where I now needed to validate some of the stuff we were doing across even American firms, even very significant American firms. And the problems we were dealing with, turns out it was the right instinct. There's just like a least common denominator of things. So you may have more polish there, but there's some things that are just not solved. It doesn't matter where you are. This problem exists. So that's how we ended up there. Or here.
And what would you say is the most difficult decision? And by the way, before I go there, I was going to ask, so those competitors you're fighting it out with, where are they today?
They don't exist.
Okay. I feel like I know what you're talking about, but I'll leave it off the air. But yeah, you had the staying power, the wisdom to stay through it. So what would you say is the most difficult decision that you have had to make through this whole journey?
I think one of them is when we had this inflection point, because at that point, we needed to get external cash because I was running out of savings. I'm like, this particular business, we shouldn't continue this. And whatever we need support because we have a chicken and egg problem. So you have to put money we need to invest in. I think that's like the biggest one, I would say. Just having to bring in external parties into our company.
Why do you consider it difficult? Because of the part where you have to bring in those external parties? Is it a difficulty in having to work with them, or the exposure you gave your business to them? What about it was very difficult?
Like for me, I think when you're raising money, this is my own personal view. Not something I subscribe, but these were my takeaways from what I had seen as a student, what I had observed outside. I think also just aligned with like who I am and whatever my values are. I felt that it was important to bring in capital once something was validated and once there was sufficient leverage. We had validated the previous model, but we're getting into a new model entirely, and now it's going on a hunch. It was a hunch, not like some validated thing.
I see.
But to be fair, we ran a pilot for like 1 month, and I was like, okay, whatever we are thinking is possible. It was just before the pandemic hit, or when the pandemic was hitting. Yeah, and then there just wasn't sufficient leverage. So when you don't, and even now we still don't have sufficient leverage. And when you don't have leverage, it makes certain conversations more difficult. Yeah. I mean, like for us though, our initial investment was from someone I know personally. So some of those problems did not exist necessarily. Like why leverage would be important or whatever. Like that was not important with that particular investor. But, I would say as time progresses, right, and we will need capital, right? Like it would have been good to be at a certain position in that curve, right? It's just that the initiation of the spot on the curve or the line started earlier than I would have liked. So it's something that resuscitates or shows itself up. So, shows up, as we go along. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. We're going to start tying things together and want to move to understand a little bit about your leadership style. So for you, what do you try to be as a leader?
Very accessible. I think that's my number one, is just to be very accessible and available to the people who I work with. I want our team members to feel as if there is no limit, or they're the ones who are defining the limits. I don't impose limits on them in terms of what they can do, how far they can go, what they can accomplish, etc. So I try to create an environment where hopefully that becomes visible to them or obvious to them. I endeavor to work alongside folks who truly can self-manage themselves.
You're not a micromanager.
I don't want to be.
Okay.
Yeah. Because sometimes you find yourself micromanaging, particularly if things are not going well.
Right.
Yeah. But like day to day, like for me, I prefer a situation where I am a guide to someone, not directing them on what they should do. I want people who work alongside me to have good outcomes. And I also want them to know that I want them to have good outcomes. And this is even like, down the road, like good financial outcomes and so on, right? Like for me, and hopefully the path, if someone is passing through our company, I would like it to have been a very significant part in building whatever the rest of their lives is. And then because, of course, we're a young company, arguably now, with strained resources and so on, for the individuals to be exposed to and to do way more than they would have ever imagined at the level of position they have is also of extreme importance to me. Yeah.
Interesting. And in terms of you leading the organization, what role or how important would you say having the right people in the organization has been?
I'm sure you know this very well, but sometimes you have the right people and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you think you know how to have the right people and then you realize, oh, you don't know how to have the right people. Like maybe the problem is me. So, like, of course it makes a difference. And like, the more you become better at it, the more you realize you screw ups and the more you realize how important it is to have the right people. Because the wrong people can bring your company down. Yeah, so I was away, as you know, and then I just got back to the office again. Today's Wednesday, right? So 2 days ago, Monday. And then there were some things going on, and we have quite a number of new team members. And I needed to talk to them because they're in the ops team and something was going on. And like we have this customer, it was our old customer who has actually, like, I remember when we did our first, like, the equivalent of like you're trying to figure out what your net promoter score is, but it's not like, pure net promoter. They gave us like everyone was giving us like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Like 8 out of 10. I think the worst we got 7 out of 10. And then they were just like 1 out of 10. They were the only customer to give us like a negative review. And
That's brutal.
it was very, very brutal. I'll never forget it. But at the same time, I was like very happy because like when I looked at what they said, I was like, what they're saying is like the amalgamation of any one thing anyone else may be unhappy about, but they're just putting it together, you know. And like that customer, long story short, we worked with them for a long time, and then they ended up hopping to somebody else, yet another startup. And then whatever happens to some startups happened, and then they came back. And then they were complaining about the same stuff. And I was livid. I'm like, how are we still having the same problems? And this particular customer is having the same experience that they complained about X years ago. You know? And so when I was talking to the team, I was just like now, we're not going to be accepting of any errors. Like, we need to be error-free. Don't want 99.5%, 99%, 95%. No. No errors. No errors. Convince yourself that there is no excusable error and there is no excuse for making one. Just convince yourself. Right? And then I also went on to explain that, like, how I think about not just excuses in general, especially now. And this is also part of me reflecting on how I've managed over time. Like, I used to let people certain things slide, right? Or people would say, oh, you're being too hard on this or you're being too hard on that. Then I'm like, am I being an awful manager? Okay, fine. I'll like sort of like cut some slack here, cut some slack there. And then some very significant things happened because of cutting slack or letting things slide, that ultimately the person who felt the most pain was me. And I know, yeah, like they're literally like almost like company breaking things, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to cut slack. Also, I was just like, understand like how I think, which is when I see somebody doing one bad thing, I apply a multiplier to it. And I'm like, how many bad things, other bad things can you do?
Yeah. One thing you said that is quite interesting is allowing things slide when they look small. But like you said, those things grow. There's a multiplier effect. Once you allow it, you tolerate it and it becomes a culture. But you're also right. Once you start getting hard on it, people begin to make you feel like, are you a bad person? It's just a little thing. Yeah. So it's better to own it when it's still small. We like you said, one of the reasons why I tell this stories is exactly what you said. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of work, a lot of passion, a lot of smart work going on. And we just need to tell those stories. People need to know that those things are here and are happening. And I think speaking with you has also further strengthened my own resolve. I mean, I've never met you, even because of Disha. I probably would not have met you, right? But speaking to you right now, I'm asking myself, how many more people are out there doing incredible work that I want to meet, right? And so it's been an incredible opportunity to speak with you. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this video podcast. So please do subscribe to the channel so that you can continue to get videos like this into your feeds. Hear the stories of African entrepreneurs, how they are growing their businesses, the challenges they are facing, the successes, and how they can continue to expand and how you can learn from those experiences. Thank you very much.